the 6th most decorated manager in football history, and the 2nd of all active coaches, Carlo Ancelotti will coach the Brazilian national team. Also, Don Carlo will be the first foreign manager of the Brazilian men's team in a century. Yes, since 1925, Brazil have always been coached by Brazilians, and while the federation has desperately tried to keep this tradition alive, it was obvious that the Brazilian national team wouldn't and couldn't be successful with coaches like Tite and Dorival Jr. So, after at least 2 years of constant rumors that Ancelotti would take over, he will finally fulfill the dream of at least 200 million Brazilians and many more fans around the world. But before we discuss the burning question why Carlo is perfect for Brazil and how will he change them, let's talk about the past. Look, in 2002, after Brazil's last World Cup triumph, with the legendary Luiz Felipe Scolari at the helm, one of the heroes, Rivaldo, made a very strong statement. The Seleção is ours and has to be managed by someone who has Brazilian blood running through his veins. And from that moment on, 9 different coaches tried to follow in the footsteps of the 5 legendary coaches of Brazilian football folklore. Vicente Feola, 1958, Aimor Moreira, 1962, Mario Zagallo, 1970, Carlos Alberto Pereira, 1994, and Luiz Felipe Scolari, 2002. The 5 coaches who have won the World Cup with Brazil, all coaches with Brazilian blood in their veins. Even the latter 2, Pereira and Scolari, tried for a second time, leading Brazil at the 2006 and 2014 World Cups respectively. But even they, even those who knew the feeling of lifting the game's most coveted trophy, couldn't do it twice. I mean, the current generation of Brazilian coaches is so bad that even Roberto Carlos struggled to name any quality coaches from the country.
Não, o Brasil tem grandes treinadores. Tem o Diniz, que é o treinador do Fluminense. Tem o treinador do São Paulo também, que é muito bom. Aí no Flamengo já tem um argentino, no Palmeiras tem um português, no Botafogo tem um português.
You see, even if the biggest Brazilian clubs are managed by foreigners, how can you expect the national team to do well with a Brazilian coach? Of course, we have to mention that this interview is more than a year old, and things have changed for the worse. Palmeiras, managed by Portuguese, Cruzeiro, Portuguese, Botafogo, Portuguese, Sao Paulo, Argentine. Now 23 years on from Rivaldo's legendary statement, things have changed and a foreign coach is finally in charge of the Brazilian national team. And the foreigner is none other than Carlo Ancelotti himself. According to media reports, the Brazilian Federation first contacted Carleto in the aftermath of Brazil's disappointing exit from the 2022 World Cup at the hands of Croatia. At the time, Ancelotti had 2 years left on his contract with Real Madrid, and after a disastrous 2024-25 campaign, he will be leaving one legendary stadium, the Santiago Bernabéu, for another, the Maracanã. So, to get down to business, why exactly will Carlo Ancelotti succeed in charge of Brazil? Reason number 1, tactical flexibility. Listen, Ancelotti isn't one of those managers who walks into a team, slaps a rigid formation on the whiteboard, and makes the whole squad stick to it. Instead, Carlo is something much rarer in modern football, a manager who looks at his players first and builds everything else around them. And to illustrate this, let me give you a few examples. Guardiola, a strictly possession-based brand of football, no matter what team he manages. Jose Mourinho, strictly defensive brand of football. Hansi Flick, ultra-high pressure, focus on counter-pressing, and fluidity in attack. Ancelotti, on the other hand, is the type of coach who adapts to what he has in front of him. At AC Milan, for example, in the early stages of his coaching career, he implemented a 4-3-1-2 diamond formation that got the best out of Pirlo, Seedorf and Kaká. Then, at Chelsea, he switched to a 4-3-3, with Drogba leading the line. At Madrid, he's gone through 3 different tactical identities, depending on the players available. During his first spell at the Bernabeu between 2013 and 2015, Carleto played with Xabi Alonso as a deep-lying playmaker and Modric and Di Maria as creative units. Defensive midfielder Sami Khedira also played a fair amount of minutes. 6 years later, Carlo returned to the Bernabeu with Toni Kroos already in the team, playing the deeper role of Xabi Alonso. In his first 2 seasons back, Ancelotti's tactics were fairly straightforward. Kroos, Modric and Casemiro in midfield, When Bellingham arrived, however, things got interesting, because in the 2023-24 season, we saw a completely different Real Madrid. Benzema and Casemiro were already gone, while Tchouaméni, Valverde and Bellingham played crucial roles. The most important of these was Jude, for whom Ancelotti found the perfect position, a false 9 box-to-box midfielder. In defense, he covered the entire midfield, but when it came to being decisive in the penalty area, Jude Bellingham was in a league of his own. He finished the season winning the Champions League and La Liga, as well as contributing 36 goals in all competitions. None of this would have been possible, however, if it wasn't for Ancelotti. Now, let's put all of that into Brazil's perspective. What do we know about the Brazil's national team style of play, the Joga Bonito? Of course, if there is one international powerhouse that does not adhere to strict positional play, it is definitely Brazil. Throughout their most successful years, Brazil have always been solid at the back, but free to dance, create and play the beautiful game up front. Unfortunately for them, Carlo is the master of that balance. He won't try to turn Vini Jr. into a high-pressing robot or ask Paqueta to play sideways passes all day. He'll let them do their thing, but with just enough guidance to avoid the kind of tactical naivety that has plagued Brazil in recent years. Remember Real Madrid's Champions League run in 2021-22? It wasn't textbook, it wasn't clean. There was talk that Real Madrid weren't even the 5th best team in Europe, but they still won the Champions League. And the key was, they were devastatingly effective. One week they'd sit deep and counter, as they did against PSG in the first leg of the round of 16 that year, or against Man City in the quarterfinals at the Etihad last season. They'd play defensively, because that is what gets you results at that particular moment. Now, imagine that kind of tactical flexibility with Brazil's talent pool. You've got explosive creative wingers like Vini and Rafinha, a generational striker in Endrick, creative midfielders like Bruno Guimaraes and Lucas Paqueta. Even Casemiro has been linked with a return to the national team. As revealed by Fabrizio Romano shortly after Ancelotti's appointment, we could and would probably see one last dance for Neymar. There you have it, a mix of excellence, raw talent and athleticism. You don't want a coach who's gonna overthink it or limit it with dogma. You want someone who's seen the tools and builds the house. And that's why, given the current state of the Brazilian national team, you need a coach who's versatile. If plan A doesn't work out, you have plan B, plan C, you try again and again and again until you get there. That is the kind of coach Carlo Ancelotti is. Next up, reason number 2, experience in managing superstars. First of all, it's clear that Brazil have never been short of talent, but managing that talent is another matter entirely. You're dealing with big personalities, even bigger expectations, and a national obsession that treats every World Cup like a matter of life and death. That's where Carlo Ancelotti shines. Over the past 25 years, he's coached some of the biggest names of the 21st century: Zidane, Ronaldo, Cristiano Ronaldo, Kaká, Ibrahimovic, Pirlo, Beckham, Drogba, Modric, Ramos, and now Vinicius, Bellingham and Mbappe. And he's done it without drama, no ego wars. The players don't just respect him, they love working with him. But at the end of the day, what is Carlo's secret? Well, the single most important thing is that he doesn't try to control every move. He gives the players freedom, trusts their instincts, and creates an environment where the stars feel protected. Remember how desperate the situation was with Vinicius before Ancelotti arrived at Real Madrid? The Brazilian talent was missing a lot. Yes, the quality was there, but the finishing product was absent. And then along came Don Carlo. He gave Vini a simple but incredibly powerful piece of advice. When you find yourself in a goal-scoring opportunity, make 1 or maximum 2 touches before shooting. He was basically teaching him the basics of the art of scoring. And since then, Vini has completely changed his game. And that's exactly what Brazil's current generation needs. Vini Jr., Rodrigo, Neymar if he returns, Endrick coming in, Rafinha on top of the world but still needing guidance, Antony also on the verge of an iconic return to the national team, other young talents coming up, like Chelsea's new star, Estevão Willian. These aren't players you micromanage, you guide them, you empower them, and Ancelotti does that better than anyone. And finally, reason number 3, the hunger to lift the only major title he has never won. Look, Carlo Ancelotti isn't just a top manager, he's the most successful club manager in the history of the Champions League. He's lifted the trophy 5 times. He's won league titles in Italy, England, France, Germany and Spain, something nobody else has done. His CV is a museum of footballing greatness, but there's just one thing missing: international glory. And that's what makes this job in Brazil different. It's not a step down, it's the final mountain. At 65, Ancelotti, he's got nothing left to prove in club football. Leading Brazil to World Cup glory would be the ultimate closing chapter. And let's face it, a motivated Ancelotti is a dangerous one. And if he does, whether in 2026 or 2030, it will be his ultimate legacy. He could easily be crowned the greatest coach to ever grace the game. And on the other hand, Brazil need him too. They've tried younger coaches, tacticians, disciplinarians, but now they're handing the keys to a serial winner who's been at the top for 2 decades and still has the hunger for one last dance. And to end on an interesting note, did you know that Ancelotti has actually coached a World Cup final involving Brazil? Yeah, that happened in 1994 when the young Carlo was an assistant to Arrigo Sacchi and Italy lost to Brazil. How crazy football can be sometimes. Now, what are your expectations of Ancelotti as Brazil coach? Will he magically revive the team for the 2026 World Cup? Or will he need more time, at least until 2030, to be competitive enough? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, or if you want to learn more about Anthony and his fascinating season at Betis, click on the video you see on your screen right now.